we'll do today in this session is we're going to try and explain kind of why you want to use find matching items, and then go into Formpak and do lots of examples of the use, the practical use of it, because there are very many. So with find matching items, you can find any product by almost any criteria, and you can combine the criteria as well. So when you have a large product library, it enables you to find those products that are really hard to find, that ordinarily you might be trying to create a new one because it's too hard to find the old one. So this is like finding a needle in a haystack as a concept, if you like. So as an example, you might be looking, is it currently sold and created within the last 2 years? And the cost is between 10, 50 and 11, that it's not toxic by different routes, that it's stable in a particular application, and that it's allergen free. So that's just an example of the kind of criteria that you might want to combine. So it's both commercial and technical criteria. Additionally, you can add checks for a particular customer. So when you search and find matching items, you can add those criteria to narrow down results into your library. And then you can also apply a suitability check, which is compliance to customer rules. So if you have, for example, a customer that requires all ingredients that are on particular inventories, that's a check you can make. If you have a bit more complicated checks, like there must be a minimum of certain types of ingredients, or even more complex, that the customer's base using your product must not have special consumer warnings. So this could be about cosmetic allergen labeling, food allergen labeling, or anything. So anything that you need to calculate that you can't immediately calculate, or you can't immediately see the answer to on the item itself, you have to calculate by kind of extrapolation. You can do that with these suitability checks. So it's very, very powerful. And from the search results in find matching items, you can report all different types of information about the products you found. So it will always show you the search criteria, and then you can choose to show properties, for example, like flashpoint of GHS hazards, country suitability, identifying information if you're searching for raw materials, and then human assigned attributes as well. So things like colour, taste, smell, and usability. And there's also baskets, which is much easier to demonstrate than to explain. But fundamentally, a basket is a thing for holding stuff in, and you can move that stuff from one part of the system to another. So you can collect things and place them elsewhere. Very, very handy. So we're going to go into the software and start showing you some of these tools. So from the home screen, which I think you're probably all familiar with, if I type in FMI, because they are the initials, and I've done it in capitals, if they're the initials of an area, you can go straight to it. So I tend to use that now for FMI because I'm always in it all the time. And from here, so it's a large search screen because it's so flexible. So it's large, but it does everything, and that's why. So we could just search for example, all raw materials. So if we did untick formulation and then click search, we could find all raw materials. And there's a lot. You can see we've got not as many as in a real system, but for a training system, quite good. So we have, probably about 600. And if we wanted to, we could tune in more, because at the moment we've got all raw materials. But what we could do is say, okay, we only want to look at regulatory raw materials. So we've dived into the item classes and selecting one area. And now, so we have less results because we've filtered some of them out. From all of those results, we can also print. And so if we click print, you can see there's lots of information that you can tick to say that you want to see it. So because I'm looking at regulatory materials, I'm going to untick these, and I'm going to tick some other things that I think are quite helpful. So like CAS, EC and FEMA. And there's lots of other things I can do, but what I'm going to actually do is under properties, I'm going to say I also want to look at some GHS hazard information. So I want to understand about the GHS categories and hazards for these raw materials, and maybe I also want to compare it to the CLP version. I could continue with OSHA, etc. I could choose the print format, so I could go into Excel if I wanted to do further analysis, or I could go into landscape just so that it's a bit broader. So I'll do that and print. So you can see here we've got all of those components with the information we requested shown on the screen. So that's a very handy way of reporting information. And obviously, and for formulations, of course, I mean, I'm showing it for raw materials, but we will do some formulations too. I'm going to use the reset button to empty the criteria. So I'm now back up to the what criteria do I want to add, sort of like from a fresh point of view. So what I'm going to do, this time I'm going to search for formulations. I won't put any criteria in, but I'm just going to show you one of the useful print functions as well. And when you can select individual ones to print, so then only these 3 will print. But if you leave them all unselected, there's an assumption that you mean to print everything. So if you print, there's a kind of handy tool that we just did a tip of the month about this. You can search for the kind of use of your products. So you can look at times used, you can look at how many times do these formulations appear in other formulations with this formulation count. You can also do components count. So the components is how many physical materials are in the formulation as naturally presented. So I'm going to print those. So here you can see obviously we've got quite a lot of short formulations because that's what we tend to use for demonstrations and training. But you can also see that, so this dilution is used in 2 formulations. So again, it's just a handy way of looking at data. That it's not so easy to know the answer without doing this kind of analysis. Now, let's have a think about some like practical day-to-day scenarios that you might want to investigate. One of the most common uses of find matching items is for searching the library when you've had a customer request to provide products. So it could be they say, send us your best lemons, and then you look at and see, okay, what are your best lemons? What are the price criteria, etc. So I'm going to keep formulations ticked, and I'm going to search by price. So I'm going to do 8 to 12. Your searches would probably be narrower, but again, we don't have as many products as you. And what I can also do is I can look at those human assigned attributes. So what does it smell or taste like, for example, or how does it feel? And so in the library details, which I've just opened, I can look at the character class. So you might say, okay, I'm looking for florals. And these are pick lists that you add yourself. So character class and note, they're empty. When you get a Formpak system, you can add as many as you like that are the descriptors for your own products. So if I click search, you can see that obviously these are the things that are in cost, and they all have something floral in terms of a sensory attribute. And you can see it's not based on the name, it is actually based on that pick list. And if I open up the search by clicking here, I can tune it a bit further. So maybe I'm interested in, so floral and geranium. So this will give me a different set because now some of them wouldn't have been geranium, so I should get a shorter list. And so you can imagine with a very big library, the kind of criteria that you add about your products enables you to find that sort of needle in a haystack. In addition to those sort of pick lists that you can add yourself, you can also, I'm just going to take that one away, use a sensory description. So I know that I've got one formulation in here that has a comment that it's got a chocolate note. So I'm going to put that in there. And if I search, so it's found the rose geranium formulation. And if I just show you this one. So from find matching items, if you select one item in the list, view details becomes available, and you can click on it to go to that formulation. And the information we've just been searching is obviously coming from the cost, but also then the classification. So you can see here, this was classified as floral with notes of geranium and rose and a nice hint of chocolate. So the information that you write in this sensory description that often could be customer facing style description, can be searched in find matching items. And additionally, we've focused on the top half of this criteria, but you can add intended applications and dosage and intended parties as well. So that could be intended customers or intended geographical regions, for example. There is at the end of here marketing class notes and marketing description, so very similar to the bit at the top. The reason there's two separate ones is because sometimes people want to have an internal or customer facing one, and that there could be a marketing description that was available online, particularly if you're matching products. And also, if you're buying products for evaluation purposes, you might want to log those and actually have your market product library also on Formpak, and that's entirely possible. And you then might want to separate out your market products from your internal products by only classifying information on market products and not talking about them in another way. So it's got a couple of different purposes, but all of it's searchable in the system. So we're going to have a look at another sort of a quick one. So if I just reset, so again I'm back to a blank search option, I might want to look at formulations that have been sampled, because potentially that something has been sampled is an indication that somebody else thought it was good, and so therefore you might want to find things that have been sampled. So I've gone too far. See here, has been sampled. If I click yes, I can tune it by a date, because if you've got a system that you've had for a long time, has been sampled 10 years ago, that might not be the best indicator for what people are looking for today. But if we look at has been sampled, yes, you can see it comes up with things that have been sampled. And that has been sampled in the examples we've got here. These have all been sampled from the Formpak system, but the sample date could also come in from an ERP system. So you don't have to do everything in Formpak to sometimes get the benefits of these kind of searches, but you do. The data has to be there, of course, if you want to search for it. I'm going to do another search now. So imagine you're looking for formulations of a certain character, but you need to start thinking about regulatory as well, because your customers have said we don't want this, or we do want this. So I'll just do a different type of search. I'm just going to say I'm going to search for formulations which have got citrus in the name. So I'm going to untick raw materials. So if I do an initial search, you can see that we have quite a number. And I'm going to tune it down. So I'm going to say, okay, what I also want to do is find formulations that have that citrus in the name, but I also want to make sure that the flash point isn't flammable. So I'm going to say I want a flash point that's greater than 61. If I search again, I've now got a shorter list, but I want to sort of tune it even further with these properties. And if I click on the plus button, I can say this or, but what I'm going to say this and. So it's both of these criteria must be true in order to appear in the search results. Now, there's all kinds of things that customers ask for, and some of them you can forward search and some of them not so much. But the kind of thing that you might be asked for is that a customer doesn't want any products on their physical site if they've got a CM or R classification. So one way you could do that would be to individually enter so we don't want any carcinogen 1As, and we don't want any carcinogen 1Bs, and you could continue through all of those, but there's quite a few, so it's not the most convenient. If you only had this query occasionally, then doing it like this would be fine. But if you've got it and you want to be able to do it more efficiently, because it's something that happens quite often, you might want to have a different property that represents any of the C, M or R classifications and is calculating it. If it's got any C, M or R, it's going to be a yes. And so that we've got one of those properties that's in the system to help with this. So I'm going to take away that and I'm going to change it to that one. And what we have got is a property called is CMR. And it has a CMR classification, so it's looking at all of those ones. And it's not that it equals something. What we really want is to find ones where the value is not there, because this is a particular type of property where it either has a value or it doesn't have a value. And we want to look for things where we don't have one. So we're doing a search for flashpoint greater than 61 and that it doesn't have that it is a CMR. And if we search again, we now have a shorter list. So it's removed some because they were not going to be ideal. So those things are forward searchable because they're attributes directly on the items, but there are some things that you have to calculate to know the answer. And this is where suitability checking comes in. So if I open up the library details, at the end, there is this suitability check. And if we say yes, here's where we can add a customer and an application and dosage to perform a suitability check to see, okay, what have we got in the library that not only meets those criteria, but conforms for a particular customer and application. So if I put in a fussy customer, because I've got quite a few requirements, I'm going to say candle at 5%, and I can search again. So now it will find the same items, but it's taking longer because it's suitability checking all of the ones on the first page of results. What does it? It checks each page of results in turn. So it finds all of the items, but it only checks the first page because it's quite an intensive process. It's looking at sometimes the physical composition and physical properties, but potentially also the regulatory composition, and it's then expressing the answers. The first page of results, obviously, it's shortened it to 10 in order that it can do 10 at a time, because that's something you can do in a sensible amount of time. And it's found that there are 3 that are not suitable and the rest are suitable. Obviously, we can print this report and it will show us those yeses and nos for suitability. And in this scenario, it's only saying yes and no. It's not telling us why. But if we were interested in finding out, okay, why were things failing? Maybe we had everything was failing and you think this doesn't look good. Why is everything failing? Maybe there's a common factor. You could investigate it by selecting the failures. Obviously, you could also select the passes. If you select the failures, you can add them to a basket. And I'll just put it into basket 6. Now, if I go into that basket, those are there. And from here, I can do a full suitability check. So I'll do check suitability. And check. And it gives me the results as we'd expect. But what you can do from here is if you can view the details. So if you view the details, you can then, you can do them individually or one at a time. And so on the first formulation, it's saying, okay, it's failed because you have got too much eye damage. And on the second formulation, if we go down, it's failed because we've got too much skin sensitization and too much environmentally hazardous chronic 2. So you've kind of got options really. The fine matching items is a quick way of doing that suitability check once you've tuned into the kind of formulations that are interesting for the other reasons. And then if you wanted to expose why, you would use the basket to kind of then easily get to a bigger suitability check as an option. So then we also have some other kinds of searches that we can do. So if I again reset. We can do, for example, minimum % natural. So we scroll and again, we look at formulations. There's actually a special property for it here that is the minimum overall, but I'm going to use the isNat one. For people who were in the previous session, hopefully this is familiar. So isNat one, actually no, that's not the one I probably want thinking about it. It's nat 1%. So nat 1% is about the percentage that relates to how much of it was a natural one. And I can say it's got to be equal to something, but more often than not, I might be saying, okay, it's got to be a minimum. Maybe I want to say it is a minimum of 10. And obviously this little balloon comes up to tell you the kind of information that's the expectation over this side. Let's see if I search. So I have a bunch of formulations that have a minimum of 10% natural. If I obviously can increase it, and you'll see that the list will go shorter. Not much shorter, actually. And then you can have, for example, say if we wanted to zoom in and we wanted to look at flavour formulations only, because obviously if you've got a business where you're doing different types of formulations, you might want to tune it. We could look for example, biologically active principles, which is the list of limited substances, so things like estragol, pulegone. What we're trying to find is where there is no value. We want the things that don't have this property. So we're going to say empty for this. If we search, these are the flavour formulations which do not have any of those limited substances. On the other hand, if we wanted to find the ones that do, because maybe we're doing some kind of research, we might want to switch it to that they do have a value. And then we get a different list. And just to sort of show you a bit more about that, if we look at that formulation there, on the properties and in the food information, if I just do a quick search for that, you can see that there is one entry. It's actually exposed here, but obviously because we were looking at this one particularly, you can see that it's estragol that's in this particular formulation. So it allows you to do all kinds of searches and combine them as well for lots of different reasons. There's another one I'm sort of like quite keen to show you as well. So again, looking at flavour formulations, maybe we want to search for products that could be considered to be low fat. And so we want there, so we'd be searching for fat as the fat content. And if there's no fat in a product, then it's 0. So because this is going to be a percentage. So we don't want to search for things where there's less than 4%, because if we want there to be fat there, so because we know that that's part of the requirement, we might want to search for where there is fat, but that it's less than 4%. So there's a couple of things we can do. So we can say that fat doesn't have a value because we want to exclude those zeros, and that fat less than 4%. So if we search, so we can see these are the products that meet that criteria. And again, on that flexible print, we can print and add that value. So we can see what are the actual values that these different items have. I've gone wrong somewhere because I'm getting some zeros. Let's try that again in a slightly different way. So fat, I'm going to sort of cheat a little bit because I'm going to put in an actual number because I know this will definitely omit them. So yeah, a much shorter list. And it's remembered that from previous because we hadn't refreshed it or reset it. And so now this looks like a better list. And one of the things, obviously, you've just seen me, I've been using Formpak for a long time. You've just seen me have to do it again because I didn't quite have the right idea about the criteria. Because of the flexibility of the system and which really relates to the variety of properties that there are and how they can be presented, sometimes those criteria around how to tune it takes a little bit of practice. But obviously in anybody's business scenario, they'll be familiar with their items and properties, and so you get your head around the things that are relevant for you. I also wanted to, so if I reset again and do some different types of searches. So that was about library searching for kind of customer purposes, but sometimes you need to do searches to investigate problem cases or for regulatory reasons, and you can absolutely do that. So, for example, you might be interested in, say, if there was because I know this is becoming a bit of an issue in the flavour and fragrance industry, there are more components being classified as CMRs. And it could be that there's a new classification that's come through, and then you want to report on, okay, well, how many formulations now have this classification? This is a good way here to do it, for example. So we can say, okay, for formulations, we want to find the ones that are a CMR. And so obviously that would then become is it a CMR? Yes. So these all have a CMR classification. So it could be a C and an M and an R, or it could just be one of them, but they have them. So if I look at the basil and thyme again, on the properties, if we look at those GHS hazards, you can see that we have a mute 2 and a carcinogen 2. So this has 2. And obviously, as you know, we can report it so that we can see all of that if we want to, but at least we've had that validation that this definitely has found things where this is true. Now, see, this is quite a lot, but which ones matter more than others is, up for debate. But it could be that with this sort of data, you think, okay, well, have I sampled them or not? Because if they're internal samples, or maybe there could be dilutions of ingredients, they're perhaps not so relevant. But if I've sampled them, they're more relevant. So if I go now, if I scroll down to that sample area, I could say has been sampled, and it could be yes. And you can then obviously tune it further to say, okay, so although there were quite a lot that had that classification issue, there's a smaller number that have been sampled. This isn't telling you who to or when, but you can dig into it again using the baskets. So if we select those results and use add to basket, and if we find an empty basket, I've been using lots of baskets recently, and I do basket 21. And if I go into a different area, which is the search for samples, I can see I've got this add from basket. So I can use add from basket to select my basket 21, select all of them, then search. So obviously they've appeared here. So now if I search for those items, it tells me which ones have been sampled where. So some things have been sampled more than once. So it just gives you that sort of overview of who had it and when. So you might want to take some additional action. And as an alternative to this, so obviously this is reliant on that sampled date to find them. If you're not managing samples in Formpak, or you don't have that data in Formpak, you can still use cross-references to expose useful information. So I'm just going to kind of show you how that can work. So in cross-references, if I go into manage cross-references, for any given customer or item, you can see relationships. So I'm going to use one of these. So let's look at the big HQ. one and search for all of the cross-references that are associated with this company. You can see down here that we have sample dates against some of them, but not all of them. So if we've got a sample date, that obviously means we know we've sampled it, but these other ones could exist because we've sent documentation. So if you don't have sale and sample date, every time you print a document and record the supply, it will create a record in this table, and that is an indication, obviously, of a relationship between one of your products and a customer. And so from here, you can you could add to basket. Pick a new basket, basket 14. And what you can then do back in find matching items is as well as being able to add to a basket, you can add from a basket. So I think it was 14. So this is a bigger list because obviously previously we were looking at the things that were sampled. This is now anything to do with the customer. So it pushes those all in, and I could do the same search by saying, okay, I want to know which ones of these are or are not is CMR. But what I could do if I wanted to know the answer to all of it is if I press print. Oh, sorry, I better search first to find the results, then print, and then I can just go in and say, okay, well, what is the value of is CMR? So now I know the answer for all of the items that are kind of in this customer's world for any reason, and I know whether they are or whether they're not having a CMR classification at that item level. So that's lots of examples there of searches, and I'll just reset. And there's very many more.